Hi, this is Ed in San Diego, and you're on Global TV Talk Show. And our special guest today is Dr. Andrew Woods. He's up the coast in Vancouver, BC. Hello, Dr. Andrew.
Hi there, Ed. How are you?
Good. So, audience, Dr. Andrew and I have known each other about 10 years. Earlier in life, he was an entrepreneur and he lived in China for a long time, and also Vietnam, I think, and some other, I don't know, some other places in Europe in particular. And he's just a smart guy, as you're going to see in just a minute. Um, but he's also spoken at my live meetings in Seattle and Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and he's been a guest on Global TV since we began 30 months ago. So um, let's get right to it. You are into entrepreneurship. I can't even spell it, but I know how to say it, and I love it. And I've been doing it for better or for worse. It's sort of like one of the marriages I've been in. I mean, just keeps coming on in waves. Okay, so let's talk about you. Um, what's your view of entrepreneurship? I mean, in 30 words or less, um, is it a disease of the mind, thinking that you can get rich, or is the idea of just trying something without being told what to do?
It's a combination of the two.
Hmm.
I'm going to speak later about some of the work I do at a French school, and I was just reminded of the comment that George Bush made, where he said the French don't have a word for entrepreneur. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that later.
Which George Bush?
The latter,
Uh-huh. Well,
junior.
yeah,
Um,
well,
Right. Entrepreneurship, yes, entrepreneurship is an interesting topic because to me, there's all this debate about, is it something that's born or is it something that's taught? Do we learn it
hmm.
or is it from birth? And I believe it's a combination of the two. But one of the things I found in all of my research up to my latest book and research I've done in the past is that it's this constant drive. So when you're working 9 to 5, not everybody, but when people are working 9 to 5, generally they shut off at 5. An entrepreneur, I think, is thinking 24 hours a day about their business because their business is their life. There's no work life balance around being an entrepreneur. You're always on, you're always thinking about it. You know what I'm talking about in your own business.
No.
So it's something that, is it a disease? I don't know if it's a disease, but it's certainly this compulsion there. And I've fallen into that trap of just not able to turn off, the life.
Okay, so you're a doctor, a PhD. Tell us about that process. What is your specialty?
Okay, well, actually, interesting. It's not a PhD per se. It's a doctorate in management.
Ah,
There's a lot of breakouts now where there's doctors of management, doctor of business administration. So my focus, as I was living in China, was I was teaching, and I was studying entrepreneurship and running a business. So I was studying Chinese entrepreneurship, Ed. So looking at sort of and then looking at a concept which is very common, you've probably heard of it, called guanxi, which is a relationship building and how important that is in China. You
so
might,
it's two things, right? Guan and Shi, they mean different things, but they're
yes,
related.
yes. Entering a gate basically and getting beyond a gate, gatekeeper maybe. But the whole concept is of the circles of influence. So you have yourself, you have your classmates that are very important, like people you went to school with, government officials, and you're building this sort of network, rather like an old boys club that you call it in Britain, or it's not what you know, it's who you know. So
Click.
I was
Yeah.
trying to explore, and we've got quite deep in it, the links between when does this guanxi and this reciprocity of favors, when does it kind of cross a line and get into corruption? And it was a fascinating study. A book came out of it, of the study, and we basically came to the conclusion that yes, of course, it can go into corruption, but it's becoming less important in Chinese society. So I was studying entrepreneurship. I was running a business helping Chinese companies go global and Western companies get into the Chinese market. And we found that we had to do a lot of cross-cultural communication and soft skills training to avoid confusion. So much confusion going on in these relationships. And while I was doing this studying, I was teaching at a French school. That's why I mentioned the George Bush comment. I was teaching at a French school, which is world famous for entrepreneurship, and it's called emlyon. And it's recently actually it was voted as the Economist top 30 MBA, international MBA programs. Super exciting school revolving around entrepreneurship. So there was a lot of an element of coaching French students who had come over from Lyon and Paris and Chinese students working together to develop entrepreneurial concepts, which was just fascinating, the dynamics.
So I understand you teach entrepreneurship in Vancouver now at the BCIT, which is British Columbia Institute of Technology in Vancouver. So who are your students? Are they kids?
Yes, mostly. It's a real mixed bag. So you have international students. It's part of a larger degree program or awarding program. So you have students that really want to be there because they're just taking it as an evening class and they want to develop their own business. That would be a third of the students. Then you have students that are there because it's part of a larger program, a bigger program, and they need the credit. And then you have students who aren't sure whether entrepreneurship is for them, aren't sure, if accounting is for them, or they're curious. So they want to use this course as an elective as part of their bigger program. But an interesting dynamic again. And this term, I'm not just teaching the introduction to Canadian business. I'm teaching another course, which is how to sustain and grow that business. So I bring in a lot of guest speakers, usually by Zoom actually, because I can then grab people from overseas and make it really, it's called Canadian business, but it's very international in its focus. My courses anyway.
So thank you very much for that intro. I want to go a little bit deeper. The people in your classes recently, maybe you want to look back a couple of years and then compare it to today. Are they immigrants to Canada, or are they, or do they just look it?
Yeah, there's a large portion of international students on the program, and that's fascinating for me. What's rewarding about teaching? Sometimes it happens that the teacher learns more than the student. So, for instance, many of my students were from India, and I've traveled extensively around the world, as you know, but I've not had the privilege of doing business in India. So I'm learning facts and figures and bits and pieces from them as well. So there is a large portion of international students, but as mentioned, there's also domestic students that want to get going and set up their own businesses here locally in Vancouver, and one or two of them that aren't sure and maybe want to set up their businesses in their home countries.
So to tell our audience a little bit about Vancouver, we have some audience there, but it's small relative to the U.S. market for us so far. So Vancouver's right on the border, just north of the U.S. border, hop, skip, and a jump from Seattle, really, Bellingham, Washington, and then further south, Seattle. How far north and east out of the downtown core is Vancouver as a market?
It's a market. I think you have to.
Well, let's say the TV market.
The which market? Sorry.
The television.
Oh, well, I'm guessing. I mean, we pick up being based on the border, as you say. We pick up a lot of American television. So we have all the American networks: ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and then of course we have our own Canadian television. So you have a Vancouver satellite station, sort of, and then you might have next province over in Alberta. You might have a Calgary center, and then those reaches are as far as before the other geographically. Like Vancouver might go 100 miles out of Vancouver, and then it might be met with another regional player. And of course, we have Victoria, which is on Vancouver Island. We
Right.
have Victoria Television here.
Yeah. And so what about Whistler? I've been up in Whistler, and that's what's a couple of hour drive, isn't it?
Oh, certainly, yeah, it's great. I mean, it's world-class skiing if you're into skiing,
Mm.
and it's just a wonderful resort, mountain biking, etc. I mean, we're quite blessed here with the Rocky Mountains and the ocean on one side. But you know, as some of our earlier conversations, you also pay for that privilege through very high real estate
Price tag. Yeah.
prices, etc. But it is a wonderful place to be.
Yeah. Okay. So down here in San Diego, we're at the other end of the
Mm,
West
yeah,
Coast.
yeah,
And then, of course, there's Baja right here. But um, we also pay the price of having fairly decent weather here.
yes.
Um, Less rain. Actually, will you send some rain here? You
Oh,
know,
we
I
get a
don't know
lot.
why they've never built a pipeline to reverse engineer the water, because you guys get too much rain and we don't get enough. So why not just send it to us in a pipeline and
Well,
charge?
pipelines are a political problem no matter what's flowing in pipelines. But yeah, I mean, certainly there's no shortage of. I'm looking outside the windows now and I see overcast skies, possible
Mm.
rain. There's torrential rain here. I mean, it seems to rain 11 months of the year. But you know, it depends how you look at it. It brings a lot of greenery. It's mild. It's generally not heavy rain, and you know, it's just overcast a lot. It's not always raining. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit.
So people don't worry about skin cancer as much as they do in San Diego.
Probably not. But let me talk to the local politicians, see what I can do on that pipeline. Might be a good entrepreneurial venture for us, Ed.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive here in entrepreneurship,
Okay,
and then I'm going to ask you about your new book
great.
in the next segment.
Okay,
It's called The Audacious Ask: Entrepreneurship and the Power of the Ask. So I'm not going to. I'm dying to get into that, but not just yet.
okay.
And then is entrepreneurship in my blood? I have to tell you, it's the fastest way to crash a good credit rating is to become an entrepreneur. And fun. It has peaks and valleys, and I've had
Oh,
the
for sure.
peaks and also valleys.
Yeah. Where it's a challenge is I run loads of businesses. Now I'm doing a job at the university that's more or less full time. And that's also a challenge when you shift from one kind of that high levels of freedom, although I have a lot of autonomy in what I do. You know, that's where I struggle, where all of a sudden, you know, I'm not where I'm familiar with 100% calling the shots, which is also can be bad news. You need to get a very good advisory board around you because sometimes you often you can misjudge a scenario, and I can be a little bit stubborn. So when I'm running a business, I sometimes think, well, my way is right, and I'm not taking advice. I'm much better now than I was in the past. I owned a training company in the UK for years, and it was hugely successful. And then I decided that I needed another business because I was getting bored of that, and it was kind of running on autopilot. So I dove into a tourism business, which was a disaster. The margins were tiny. I was spending 80% of my time on something that was failing and 20% of my time on something that was hugely successful. You learn from those mistakes. Hopefully, one hopes you learn from those mistakes. But you know, it's a challenging process, and yes, it's a risk. It's a risk, but if you can get by that risk and do well, there's a famous guy called Gary Vaynerchuk who's on YouTube, always giving advice about entrepreneurship, and he says something that's very valuable. And I tell my students something that's similar. I admit it that I take it from him, but I'm sure he'd be happy with that. And I say to them, you know, you're 20 years old, you're 25 years old. You can fail once, twice, three times, four times, and the show goes on, and you've got a huge runway in front of you. You know, you can be 30 and you can fail. You can be 40 and you fail. You can be 50 and you can fail. It just depends on your attitude towards risk and what is failing. Is failing's running out of money? Is that what failing is? I don't know what failing is. If it's not a success, you're a success because you've tried something that, you know, you've gone for your dream and maybe it hasn't worked. Maybe you go for your dream again, or maybe you go into a 9 to 5 job, whatever
Thank
you
you for putting that bandage on me. I need that today.
think. Always here to help.
Okay, so let's go back to teaching. Um, you showed me a video that you did a couple of years ago, um, and you were in a class, and everybody looked Chinese, but I don't. I'm they're probably Vancouverites because there's a huge Chinese population in Vancouver. But
Definitely, definitely.
so I'm not singling out Chinese people. It's just that, is it easy for you to relate? Do they understand you? Or they just look at you as like a magician?
Uh, Understand me when I'm in China teaching. Uh, that's a tough one to tell because culturally, um, Chinese students are quite reserved and they don't necessarily. Now, this is in when I'm in
So
mainland
it's
China
like
teaching.
saving face, so they don't show a
Very much,
face.
very much saving face. So I'll ask a question, and I know people know the answer, but they won't say anything. So that can be a little bit soul destroying until you know that's the way it is, and then you find creative workarounds to get them to come out of their shell. And generally, I found at the beginning of the term, everyone was shy, and once they got to know me and realized that I wasn't there to embarrass them or cause any challenge, but it's just the way they're brought up that you have a person who can't be challenged telling you the facts in a sort of a rote learning style, whereas Western education challenges people to come up with possibly creative solutions and also to challenge I always say at the beginning of the term, whether it be in Canada or whether it be in the UK, whether it be in Hong Kong, China, I always say at the beginning of the term, wherever I'm teaching, um, feel free to challenge me. And that sometimes doesn't go over well until a few months down the road, and then people start saying, and I remember in Hong Kong, I used to teach on the University of Birmingham at a program in enterprise, and I used to teach on that with a partner college, and I would have my moments of um, fake news. I think it's referred to as or alternative facts, which is so I would actually say things that weren't true and wait to see if anybody would challenge me, and I could see people like wanting
Yeah.
to challenge me, and towards the end they would challenge me and say, well, I think that's incorrect from what I've read, and that to me was a big breakthrough. Um, but definitely much less, just because of being brought up for so many years in that particular style, much less likely to challenge you, which can be good and can be bad. There are times when, I'm working with students where they might have read something that I haven't read. So when they're not challenging me, this can be good in some ways. But I do enjoy a good dialogue. And like I say, towards the end of the term, they're very changed people.
So I want to jump off this track just for a second, and we'll be right back to it. But uh, it's July 8th, and Prime Minister in Britain, Boris Johnson, has resigned, and he was a real pusher, quote unquote, of Brexit.
Okay. Yeah.
So does this mean Brexit's over?
No.
So they're never going back?
I think Brexit is actually. I need to dig into this a little deeper, but I mean, I spent a lot of time in the UK and
Hmm.
lived there for years, and have a
That's why I'm asking, because I know you have a perspective on
have
this.
a have a daughter there as well who I speak to regularly about this. Actually, she's quite interested in politics, and I find that Brexit, from my point of view, I understand both sides of the story. I've met a lot of, one of the things I love doing is I love talking to people and I love finding out different perspectives. So I think this can be a common mistake that people make is maybe they hang out in the same groups that have the same political viewpoints, and that actually can narrow the mind or close the mind. I like to talk to anybody. So if I'm in a taxi cab, I get the perspective of the driver, which might be different from the next driver. So I saw a lot of viewpoints from the pro Brexit, and the country's literally 50-50. I mean, it's pretty much drawn right down the middle. But I really appreciated the perspectives of the pro Brexit people and the anti Brexit people. There was a lot of um, over promise on the part of Johnson and his colleagues about how great Brexit was going to be and how it's going to give Britain the upper hand. It remains to be seen over time whether removing themselves from the common market is advantageous. I don't know. I mean, it's I do know it affects a lot of people who want to. One of the great things about having a European passport, and my mother was Irish, an Irish passport, and that allowed me at the age of 23, 24 to hop over to Ireland, which was a 2 week ticket. I've told you this story yet. It was a 2 week ticket that lasted 17 years, which had me go, Ireland, Italy, Holland, all over Europe, and then eventually wind up in China, and then finally back to Vancouver, then back to China, and now back to Vancouver. But one of the advantages is you can work anywhere in Europe, which I think is fabulous because it opens your mind to so much. I mean, living in London, you just hop on a plane and you're 1 hour, you're in Paris, 1 hour, you're in, 2 hours, you're in Milan. It's just totally different cultures. And I'm a huge believer that these exposures to cross-cultural, these exposures to other cultures really is even more beneficial. I would get in trouble with some of my university senior deans and what have you, but I think that's a more beneficial education. If we could give 3 year degrees and then the fourth year we give a bunch of James Joyce books and send people off to Dublin, or Italian cookbooks. I see Stanley Tucci in the background there on your bookshelf. Send people off to these different places. The learning opportunities and the expansion of the mind is just incredible.
A 2-hour flight from San Diego will get you to Denver. Okay, it's 3 hours to Vancouver, Seattle from San Diego. This is nonstop. And it's but an hour or less to Phoenix and Vegas, and San Francisco, Silicon Valley. And a lot of people don't go any further from this place. But if we were to be doing things 3-4 hours from here, we'd be in Seattle, of course, in Calgary, but also we'd be in Texas.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. And 4 hours is Chicago from here. All right. And then another 90 minutes, 2 hours beyond is the East Coast. But everybody speaks English, although they may have different attitudes about this and that. It's the same country.
Yeah.
And in Europe, the diversity is not just because things tend to look alike, other than the monuments that define Paris and Milan, etc. But the food is different, the people are different, everything's so different. It's so fabulous and also close.
Yeah. But that's like the old story of when you live in a city and if I say to you, hey Ed, let's go to San Diego, or I'm coming to San Diego to visit you, all of a sudden you think, oh no, I've got to take Andrew to the San Diego Zoo and and these are probably things that are on your doorstep that you never do. And it's the same thing. I mean, when I was living in London, I would always say to people, oh, it's so wonderful that we can hop on the Eurostar and be in Paris in a couple of hours, but how often did you actually do that? And I think to the point of 4 hours on a plane or whatever, but air travel, and I guess with the fuel rising, is going to become more expensive again. But it's easy to get a deal and get a flight from Vancouver to Dublin or Milan, and you just have a longer flight. But I remember 25 years ago when I moved from Vancouver to Ireland, everyone was like, oh my God, that was sort of a big deal. And certainly my parents, who mom was Irish and she moved from Ireland to Canada in the 60s, that was a bigger deal. Whereas now I think we can access these places if we choose to quite easily, maybe just a little more time.
Interesting. So let's talk about entrepreneurship. Specifically, do you teach how to be an entrepreneur in a technical setting or versus a marketing setting, versus a clothing store or a food store? It's the attitudes are the same, but it's really different in the execution.
Yeah. Certainly the rules are the same, but the ways of getting to those areas are different. The introductory course starts off with how do you write a business plan? Why do you need a business plan? Do you want a lean canvas or a business plan? It's looking at sort of the entry, like the pre-launch almost. And this newer course that I'm working on now is, okay, you're already up and running. How do we scale said business? So we teach it from a perspective of giving them the tools to understand how to design a business plan, and I bring in some wonderful guest speakers, like I said. So I bring in, a local accountants because it's regional, but for marketing, I bring in people via Zoom from the UK or from, the
Right.
States, or try and give them a global perspective, yet give them also the local tools. And then we do a lot of case studies where you break out and I give them live scenarios, very often tapping into well-known businesses and saying, hey, so we have this textbook that I'm following. And one of the things I said to them, and that's how and I know I'm jumping the gun here, but that's how the Audacious Ask came about, was I was reading the textbook.
That's a perfect segue because that's what's next.
Each case study in the textbook, I would hop on LinkedIn and I would write them. Just to let you know, I'm teaching at BCIT. I've come across your company, your case study, and how would you like to be my guest? Come into the class. So the first couple of times we did this, people thought this is impossible. How can you get the person from the textbook to actually come and explain the case study? Simple concept. I just asked. And I'm trying to instill that in the students, that this whole concept of just asking for things. I watch Shark Tank, which I'm sure you're familiar with, ABC Shark Tank, and I watch Dragon's Den here in Canada. And each segment, if I'm interested in the person or what they're doing, I write them saying, just saw a wonderful segment of you on
Yeah.
Shark Tank. 9 out of 10 times they write back, and I've been interviewing some of them. So I recently interviewed a fellow from who has a fitness device, and that device got a $500,000, if I recall, investment from Mark Cuban, and he's working with Shaquille O'Neal. I had a fabulous interview with him, and I asked him, can you help us with a case study? So it's a lot cooler to say to the students, we got a guy here who's going to come in and talk about his relationship on Shark Tank, his relationship, how he got there, his relation, how he got his product up, how he found Shaquille O'Neal to sponsor his product. Like, these are cool things, whereas we could take this course and each week we could just use the textbook and it would be boring as hell. But we try and make it engaging so they want to come back. And what's wonderful is a lot of the students that were in the first round, understanding how to write your business plan and get going, have now signed up to join round 2. So that makes me feel good.
Hey, that's great. Okay, we're going to get into Audacious Ask in just a second here. But I had an opportunity, going back last century, with a product that I had developed as an entrepreneur. And this guy who I didn't know from Adam, but he knew my attorney. And so my attorney was sort of brokering a deal here, potentially, of bringing in this guy. And he was a millionaire, multimillionaire. And he says, okay, you got a good idea, but you're not going to run it. I'm going to bring in my own people and we'll give you some money. And then you're going to have to get out of the way. Man, that pissed me off. I didn't even want to hear about it.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that's good or bad, but that's like a natural instinct, number one. Number two, did I make a mistake? Because it was my life and I was building something and I knew where it should go.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a stranger telling me that, get out of the way now. And that's what happens when you bring in Shark Tank or Shaquille O'Neal or XYZ.
Yeah, and usually
Maybe not all the time, but it sure will.
It comes back to that sort of ego thing. It can be hard when it's your baby to have someone say, well, you've done a great job, thank you very much, bye-bye. Sometimes it makes sense, when I mentioned the story earlier of having this successful training company, I mean, we were providing soft skills training all over the country in the UK. It was booming. And I just had this desire to have a tourism company, a golf. I don't even play golf, but I saw an opportunity with the Ryder Cup coming to the UK in the area I was living in at the time, and thought, oh, I've got to go after this. And like I said, the margins were horrendous, and the amount of time. Had someone have said to me and been honest and direct and said, you have a great company and you're screwing everything up, I would have, ego-wise, I would have hated them. I would have then. I think I'm much better now. but I would have hated them. And now I look back and I said, gee, I wish someone did say that, and I wish I listened. So, you know, there's probably a reason why they feel that maybe that's a weakness, that maybe it's marketing that's a weakness, or and they want you to stand aside. And as long as there's some kind of a plan that works out well for you, then it's a good opportunity, I guess, to stand aside and hope that it does well, because you'll be getting some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Fee of some kind, royalty or whatever, off the product. So, but yeah, it can be an ego thing. But it's almost like it being a dictator of sorts, in that you wind up having people around you that work for you that are telling you all the positive things, and not necessarily, you're in an echo chamber, and you begin to believe your own success. And so it's in a level of emotional intelligence, I think, where you need to separate yourself and be open to the opinions of others, not necessarily take them, but at least listen. Listen. And I've fallen into that trap before, and I think, and now I know that I need to get advice from many people.
Okay, we're going to shift now, and thank you for that. Audacious ask. Audacious is a fancy word. So was that an English word? Audacious?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just this whole concept of it began as interviewing entrepreneurs and said, when did you ask for something that you felt was a little bit pushing the boundaries? And then the book grew into more analyzing the traits as well. So we interview a series of entrepreneurs, and I say, a lot of them I didn't know. I just reached out to and said, wow, I saw you on TV, or I'm familiar with your product, and which in itself is an audacious ask, because nobody likes rejection, and they could easily say get lost, and none of them did. They're all very happy to share their story. When I explain that it's a book for the general public, but it's also a book for students, I think that they're quite happy to give back. Especially I find the more successful, the more interested in giving back. The smaller on the ladder tends to be less likely to give back, and more, I'm too busy for all this. And interesting what I found. But the idea is going out and asking people, what is it that you asked for that was a little bit out there and you got it? And then they go on, a lot of these entrepreneurs, to talk about very similar things about, wanting to succeed, maybe not going down the traditional route in education, seeing these opportunities, a lot of learning challenges earlier on in their lives for some of the entrepreneurs. Very interesting that if we were to take 1,000 people and ask who has these kind of learning challenges or what have you, we might find that there's a much larger amount of the population of entrepreneurs that have these issues. So just a wonderful experience, and a lot is coming out of it.
I think that I need to ask you about this issue of asking. Some people will think that that's ballsy, um, asking for things. Like, for instance, asking for money. Um, Even though you're in business, and people in business dealing with money all the time. Uh, but still, you feel like, do I have a right to do that? And how will I be viewed if I ask?
Mm. Um, well, I mean, asking for money for investment, if it's a viable investment, I think is fine. It's interesting. I gave this talk back to the classes. I gave this talk to my students, saying, as entrepreneurs, just get out there and ask people to meet with you, ask people to have coffees with you, learn from everybody. One of my students came up to me the following week with a little typed up business plan, saying, I've been following what you've been saying, and it was an international student, and I've typed up this plan, and I'd like to suggest to you that you pay for my car, and I'm showing you how I'm going to pay you back. And I was like, I love the guy after that. I was like, I can't believe, talk about audacious, I can't believe this, but at least you're picking up what I'm teaching, that you just go for it. In the end, I thought it was a poor investment, but I really admired the guy for getting out and doing that.
And how did he feel when you said no or pushed him off?
Well, I was just very honest with him. I said, listen, I said, as a student and I'm the teacher, I think this is inappropriate as a sort of professor-student relationship. It's inappropriate. And if I do this for you, I'm going to have another 30 people here next week with glossy business plans about how I need to invest in their futures. But I admire the fact that he came up with this idea. But the idea is not asking for necessarily huge things, but just knowing that, you know, I'm approachable, you're approachable. If I want to know about journalism and media, and I'm a student sitting in a class, why wouldn't I reach out to Ed? If I want to learn about entrepreneurship, why don't I say to Andrew, hey, let's go to lunch and I want to pick your brain on an idea I have? 9 out of 10 times, I'm convinced the entrepreneur will say yes, but you have to ask, or the person will say yes, but you have to ask. So it spiraled into more like, how do you ask the bank? How do you ask accountant to help you? How do you get, and it was fascinating interviewing these people and hearing their perspectives and how they give back, and how when they were starting, what they were looking for and the challenges they faced. So it's overall a fascinating piece of work to get involved with.
So the pandemic has paused. I don't. Hopefully, it's over, but probably not. Um, will there be more entrepreneurs? Will entrepreneurs be different?
That's a good question. We have this thing called the Great Resignation that I'm sure, I think you've done talks about it.
Yeah, the
We've
great
had
quit.
it, we've had this whole concept, and I always say to my wife, "Where are these people gone?" But I think a lot of people have used I mean, not everybody, but I think many people have used the pandemic as a time to say, well, is it really worth it? Is it worth it driving an hour to go into some office tower, maybe being exposed to these kind of pathogens or whatever you want to say? Is it worth it? Am I enjoying what I'm doing? Wow, look how short life is. Seeing in the early days of the pandemic how many people were unfortunately dying. I think people have a different perspective. Now, how long that perspective lasts is a different story. But I think a lot of people have said, my mother has a great pasta sauce. Why don't we jar it and see if we can? I think a lot of people are taking that chance. And what's been interesting is a lot of people have pivoted as well. So they're running a successful restaurant. Boom! All of a sudden now we're a successful takeaway, but we didn't do takeaway before. So I think people have pivoted in all different directions. And maybe a lot of people that were doing these frontline, we see the challenges with the airports now. A lot of people that were doing these frontline positions are sort of thinking, well, do I want to be working in the general public, or do I want to be doing something at home as an e-commerce business? And we've all had a lot more time, and for better or for worse, and I don't know what the incentives were or the government payments were in the United States, but people here for about 9 or 10 months were getting a couple of $1,000s a month if they qualified. So you can just sit at home and really have some time to work on your future ideas. So I think we're going to see an uptick in entrepreneurship, but how that looks over time, I don't know whether people will start going back to offices and more secure, even though these roles aren't really secure. It's a myth, but they'll be going back to offices, I'm
Is
guessing.
there a specific hot topic you see out there that people are gravitating towards, especially women um, who've left the corporate structure for a number of reasons? Mainly they can't stand the guy who's a boss, but there's other reasons too. But are these people migrating towards a specific field?
I don't know a specific field, but I mean, I'll give you an example of I had one person in my class, a very successful corporate person who loves cooking. And she came up with the concept, partnering with a chef, that they were going to do these. It's quite popular right now. There's quite a bit of competition, but they were going to focus on a unique cuisine. And you would place your order at the beginning of the week, and you have the prepackaged meal kits that come. So everything's portioned with a recipe card. This is very, like, I mean, there's several companies doing this. I'm sure there are in San Diego as well, or in the US. Several companies doing this here, but they were specific on a certain region of Asia. And that was her, I love cooking, so I don't care about my corporate. I don't enjoy my corporate. And I might make less and I might lose everything. But back to what I was saying before, what does that matter if you follow your love? As long as you can feed yourself, clothe yourself, put a roof over your head. The myth of entrepreneurship, and I get so frustrated with these YouTube people, that are always standing in front of jet planes and Bentleys. There's a guy here in Vancouver who's the sales guru in the Bentley. And it turns out he leases the Bentley and rents the mansion that he's always showing as the big successful career. But you see so many of these, I can get you rich, I can get you, and then what? I think that entrepreneurship for me is that it's a fascinating journey that you're on, that is just every day is unique and different. And it's just the journey. And if the byproduct of that is, you know, material goods, great. But if I'm just loving what I'm doing and I'm just living an average means, great as well. You know.
Dr. Andrew Woods is on LinkedIn, and you can find him. And what would be the website?
Well, actually, I was my business helping Western firms get into China. I'm actually in the process of closing right now, so that website is. But we will do a website for the Audacious Ask, and we will do a website for. I'm going to be focusing and I've been doing it all my career really, but I'm going to be focusing on support for entrepreneurs. So using a lot of that soft skills training, using a lot of what I'm learning as a professor of entrepreneurship and what I'm studying
That's
to
cool.
give one-on-one support. And quite switched on in the area as well, Canada wide, on what grants are available for entrepreneurs, and I've great connections in that space as well. So really being a one-stop shop for entrepreneurs. And a lot of people say to me, well, Andrew, a lot of these guys are struggling fiscally. Are they going to be able to pay you? And I'm happy with whatever we come up with. If it turns out that I put a lot of work in and I wind up being, a part owner or having some shares, well, that's great for them because I'm going to be hustling twice as hard to help them get to the next level. So it's all about sort of a mentorship program for entrepreneurs and using the network of entrepreneurs that I have
Hmm.
to participate in this primarily on a volunteer basis and not a lot of hours, just helping out. So that's what I'm shifting into, is really using the knowledge base to help people grow their businesses to the next level. And I love it. I mean, it's a great privilege and fun for me.
Well, let's get together sometime and have
Sure.
some Chinese food. But thank you very much for, again, being on this program, and welcome back. And I'll let you know what our conference schedule is as we get back into that. I love Zoom. And so I've come up with the idea of Global Business Mobile Talent. That's the group, um, which is an outgrowth of what I've been doing for 25 years. But um, is to keep it uh, online
Hmm.
and go in person.
Okay.
So everybody in the meeting room, in the live portion, will have their laptop open, and then we could have people and audience around the world, not
Okay.
only in
A
the
hybrid
live,
model.
but also in the marketing afterwards, in the afterlife,
Okay.
on demand.
So that hybrid model works really well. I've seen a lot of
Yeah, if it's done
conventions.
right. Yeah.
But I'll tell you something, nothing beats, for me anyway, nothing beats being on a stage and having, like, I remember the event we did in Seattle, several hundred people in that audience, that beautiful theater.
I know that
You know,
huge thing. It looked like the United Nations.
and nothing beats that because you can draw off the audience. You know what I mean? So I struggle a little bit with webinars. I've been doing quite a few of them during the pandemic, and I just don't enjoy it as much because I just
Yeah, well, there's no interactivity.
having
Yeah,
having having said that, I always declined online teaching because I just didn't feel I'd have that passion or that. And emlyon, the school, the Lyon school based at, but their Asian campus, asked me. They said, the course that you were running, we don't have a replacement to do that, and would you consider doing it online? I did this course. It was December of last year, and it was fabulous because the group was only, it was only about a dozen students, and the interaction was much better than I thought.
well, they were schooled in how to use this properly.
Well, there you go. There you
Yeah,
go. But I actually love the whole experience now of online as well. But
yeah.
like I said, I'm much more the showman, loving to be in front of the
You
audience.
are. I remember you. I don't know whether you're as physically fit. I think you are, but I remember you jumped up on the stage rather than climb up the stairs. It was like, whoa, that's cool. So, my friend, show me the book cover, Audacious Ask. Do
I
you have it?
don't have that to hand, actually, Ed. You throw me off guard.
Yeah. How about
But
your website? Is it on your website?
Well, as I was mentioning, the website now is in the process of coming down. So
Yeah. Okay.
there's going to be a new website for the book itself, and the book will be available on Amazon, and then you can pre-order hard copies as well. And so there's going to be a website for that, and then I'm in the process of designing the website for the entrepreneurship coaching, how to build a business. In the process, also of speaking with various people if they want to be on the advisory board of that. I mentioned earlier how important it is to not do these things alone. I've fallen down the trap multiple times of starting up businesses on my own and not reaching out to the right people. And this way, and it's a win-win situation because these entrepreneurs, I'm always open to help them however I
Yeah.
can help them. So it's kind of a, but I never alone again would I do something alone. I want advisory boards for everything I do.
You're an inspiration. Thank you, Dr. Andrew Woods. This is Ed in San Diego, Dr. Woods in Vancouver. Ciao. Thank you.
Great.